Hello and greetings from Essex and greetings from Suffolk. I'm in a field a few miles from a place called Haverhill, and this is actually a tri-point, proper border nerd stuff. We're actually stood right at this moment in Essex. Just go over a few steps over to this side. I'm actually in Cambridgeshire, and then when I go over this way, moving a bit north, I'm now in Suffolk. And actually there's a little line in the ground which kind of marks where all this is, so I'll just show you that now. So over that way, Cambridgeshire, stretching off into the distance, very flat of course. Essex over there, a bit more hilly, and I'll turn back on myself north of that little line thing in the ground. Bit of me shadow, and there's Suffolk. Lucky with the weather today, got another beautiful one. They're great to start off with a tri-point, but actually we're just focusing on two counties today, so we're walking the Essex and Suffolk border, a bit like Cornwall and Devon. This is the story of a river. It's the River Stour, which pretty much forms the entire border between Essex and Suffolk, apart from a little bit at the start here, so probably just be missing that bit out. It's quite hard to follow, and heading over to a first sort of crossing point over the Stour where we can properly begin the journey in earnest. As we follow the River Stour along, we're going to go through loads of really picturesque, pretty gentle countryside. Not kind of as majestic as some of the stuff we saw in Devon and Cornwall, but in its own way, it's going to have its own beauty and be really interesting. One of the areas that we're going to see is where the famous British painter John Constable did a lot of his best work, and one of his most famous paintings is set right on the River Stour, so hopefully we can get a shot of that at some point later on in the journey. So join me, let's walk the border. So the River Stour's source is actually in Cambridgeshire, a few miles north from here, but it heads south, trickles down, and hangs a left, basically starts heading east. And once it does that, that's when it starts becoming the firm border between Essex and Suffolk. So I've just come a few miles along now from the tri-point where I was, just south of Haverhill, and now picking up the river border here. It's just coming up ahead, and actually I'm not going to be able to walk too far because it's not actually a trickle here. It's actually quite wide and burst its banks a bit. So yeah, here's the border. I've got wet feet again already, just like I did in the Devon and Cornwall border right at the start. Anyway, really pretty spot, and the first part of the crossings over the Stour that we're going to check out over the coming day or two. So the River Stour heads east, eventually meeting the North Sea at Harwich and Felixstowe. Harwich on the Essex side, a really major port and passenger port, and Felixstowe on the Suffolk side, more of a container port and for trade rather than actual something that passengers use. We've come a mile or two along the course of the Stour now. We're at a place called Baythorn End. We got some lovely snowdrops in a field here, and we got some excellent county border signage stuff going on as well. So we're on the Suffolk side here, and even as a house, thatched cottage in the Suffolk pink colour, which I've been learning about recently. I'll tell you all about in a bit. Anyway, here's the bridge, and we're gonna just cross over to the Essex side. That River Stour looking really gorgeous here. And over there, I believe, is Baythorn Mill. I highly doubt there's actually a working mill these days, but it's a beautiful spot. I crossed over the other side, and here's our welcome to Essex sign. Not quite as pretty as the Suffolk one, but has got the coat of arms there, the three knight sword things, sceptres would they be? Not sure what you call them, I'll have to look it up. Now just crossing back over the bridge, but for those that maybe don't know England so well, or not from here, or don't really know the geography of Britain, so Essex and Suffolk, where are we? Well, we're essentially northeast of London, and Essex borders the River Thames in the south, and then the River Stour in the north. And Suffolk is above Essex, and both of them share a coastline with the North Sea, and look across over to Belgium and the Netherlands. And you could argue that a lot of the countryside, at least in North Essex and Suffolk, is really similar to the kind of landscapes that you see in the Netherlands, and we're probably going to see more of that as we go further along. So we've come a few miles along, again east, and we're now in a market town called Clare. Very historic, very pretty, sort of place that wins Village of the Weir, or Village of the Weir? Village of the Year awards, or Britain in Bloom, that kind of place, chocolate box stuff, but very pretty. I just wanted to show you these houses with this whitewash on it in kind of a pink colour we saw on the border sign. It's called Suffolk Pink, and I believe it's because historically they used to add pig's blood to it to give it that kind of distinctive colour. I'm sure they probably don't do that now, but yeah, and you see a lot of these places around with that special colour. It's pretty nice, and something that's very distinctive to this area. Anyway, we're just walking along, going to take us down to the next little border crossing here in Clare. Hopefully there's going to be another nice little bridge to look at. Looks like someone's got a bit of an abbey, or an old abbey in their garden. Anyway, it's also right by the river, so imagine having a garden that's on a border. Pretty cool. Anyway, here we are, a little bridge here at Clare over the border. So I'm in Sussex, where am I? Suffolk at the moment, and stepping over into Essex, I think. No signs. A bit like some of those places we saw in Cornwall where it was never saying welcome to Cornwall. Although hang on, there might be one coming up here. There seems to be another bridge, which is quite interesting. It kind of looks like used to be a railway line, but I'm not too sure. Anyway, what have we got here? Oh, it just says welcome to Clare. Clare seems to be one of those places that's been around forever as a settlement. I believe there's been findings of Neolithic tools, stuff like that. It's definitely here in Roman times, and it gets a mention in the Domesday Book. It's called Clara, I believe, so 1086. So yeah, somewhere with a lot of history. I stopped off in Cavendish for a bit now. Another chocolate box, ridiculously cute and pretty village or small town here on the Suffolk side still at the moment. Thatched cottages in pink. Not sure whether that's Suffolk pink over there. It looks a bit light coloured, but pubs called things like the Five Bells and the George, all very typically English. So we were talking about the history of Clare earlier on, and I suppose the history of Essex and Sussex is pretty ancient. I keep saying Sussex. Suffolk is pretty ancient as well. So both counties have been around, again, it's a bit like Kent and Sussex, since around the 900s. In terms of Suffolk, the name relates to the Angles, as in the Anglo-Saxons. The Angles settled in this part, and then Norfolk, and so it's the North folk and the South folk. See, the German word folk means people, that's where we get folk from. So they're the Suffolk people who first started colonising the place around sort of 400s, 500s, blending in with the original Iceni tribes that were in this part, and eventually kind of taking over, I guess, to the point where it became Suffolk, part of Mercia for a while, and then Wessex, and then eventually the Kingdom of England. And in terms of Essex, well, they're the East Saxons. So like we have the South Saxons in Sussex, Essex was the East Saxons. And again, similar timescales, first sort of turning up and recorded in that area around the 500s. And various kings of East Sussex, and oh, goodness me, various kings of Essex, the East Saxons, until again eventually becoming part of the Kingdom of England around 900s, and they've existed in that form ever since, with again a few odd little boundary changes here and there, but nothing to the extent that we've seen in some of the other videos where it's actually been shifted markedly, where it's possibly cut through a town. Still in Cavendish. I've just walked along a bit further to find the next crossing over the river. So still in the Suffolk side at the moment. Here's the border marker. Quite as fancy as the one we saw earlier, of course. And here's the little bridge, and River Stour is looking very lovely at this point and getting bigger. Stour pretty much stays like this for quite a long part of its course until we get down to a place called Manningtree, which is when it then starts to become wider and coastal. It makes its way out towards the North Sea and effectively creates that channel that made Harwich such an attractive place to to create a harbour and a port. But here it's still pretty gentle. A lovely little bridge over it, and just further down there, down the road, I can see the sign for Essex. So at the start of the video out at the Try Point, I mentioned that we'll be eventually seeing some areas made famous by the English painter John Constable. The other painter that's sort of famous around these parts is Thomas Gainsborough, who was born in Sudbury, which is one of the towns we're going to go to shortly. And even the railway line out here is called the Gainsborough line. Extremely famous English painter from the 18th century, and one of his famous paintings is of the Duchess of Devonshire, who I believe was also called Lady Cavendish. And this place Cavendish is the seat of the Cavendish family, and the head of the family is the Duke of Devonshire. So I thought I'd show you that sign earlier, which apparently is the Cavendish family coat of arms. So we're now actually in Sudbury. We're at the bridge crossing the River Stour, Ballington Street. We're not actually on the border at this point, so this is actually a part where the border's been shifted down a bit south. So Ballington over there is a suburb of Sudbury, and it's south of the Stour, but it's still in Suffolk at that point. One of those where they've moved the border just a little bit so that it makes sense that part of Sudbury isn't divided between two counties. As I said earlier, Sudbury is famous for being the birthplace and hometown of Thomas Gainsborough, and if you ever come to this part of the world, you'll see that there's a lot of things named after him and a lot of history to explore in relation to that guy. But also the author Dodie Smith lived nearby. She wrote 101 Dalmatians, on which the movie was based on, the Disney movie, and part of that story is actually set in Sudbury, and I think there's a famous bit where St Peter's Church is featured, and I think you might be able to see that just behind me there, or I'll flip the camera around anyway, and just see the tower of it peeking up across. And the river's looking very beautiful at this point. What's also interesting is that there's a Ballington Street sign actually on the side of a house that's on the side of the river. So if you pitch up on a boat, I guess you know where you are. So we've travelled down a few miles south of Sudbury. The River Stour actually kind of heads south for a few miles, and it was heading south at the Sudbury area. We've driven down alongside it, and now we've got to a lovely village called Bures, which is actually a village divided in two. It straddles the Stour, and one bit is in Suffolk, which is where I am now. This is Bures St Mary. In a minute we're going to cross the lovely cast iron bridge over into Essex, which is called Bures Hamlet. One thing I have noticed on my travels recently as well is a lot of the old red telephone boxes being turned into places that store defibrillators, which I think is a fantastic use for them now that people don't tend to use payphones. It's a really lovely historical place. Lots of 16th century buildings like that one back there. Very, very Tudor looking. Got a nice church, some nice looking pubs. And I know from a cursory read about the place but there are records of it going right back to the 800s, and of course it gets a mention in the Domesday Book as well, as many of these places do, because they've been around a long time. So just heading up towards the bridge now, which will take us over into Essex. Thought I'd get another view of the river and the church, which apparently bits of it date right back to the 1300s, and I thought I'd just get a better view of the bridge itself. It's a nice bit of cast iron work. I think it's from the late 1800s, turn of the century. Something that still requires quite a lot of maintenance. As you can see, it takes a fair amount of traffic between Colchester and Sudbury, but yeah, what a beautiful spot. They're crossing back over to the Suffolk side again now. I'd quite like to live on a village, in a village on a border. I think that would be quite cool. We moved a few miles further east, near the village of Nayland, on a bit of a main road here. This is not particularly the nicest spot. There's a funny part of the river here because it sort of divides in two for a bit and then joins back up the other side of Nayland over that way. So I just thought I'd give you a little glimpse of it here. It's quite a pretty spot. There seems to be some kind of sort of weir thing going on here. That's a pretty decent Suffolk marker to show. There isn't actually an Essex marker up ahead, it's actually just a sign to say you've entered into the, I think it's the borough of Colchester. Just down there, which you might have seen, so which hopefully you could see. It's a bit dark. Obviously Colchester, I think I'm right in saying, is the county town of Essex. On the other side of this bridge now, not great is it with all this traffic. And like I say, there's another part of the river that's kind of gone over in that direction as well. I'm going to go a bit further along to the pub, the Anchor Inn, and we can see another bit of the border there before we move on to the next bridge. We've actually come a bit further along into the village of Nayland now. Anchor Inn behind me. I don't know if you saw those cool little pod things. But yeah, this is another part of the branch off of the River Stour before it then merges again and carries on. I wasn't able to find out a lot about Nayland, but one thing I did find out was, apart from it's been around for a long time, like a lot of these villages, but actually, whether it's, I think in Old English, it got the name because that means island, and I guess with the river splitting into two, that bit, it was almost like there was a little island in the middle there on which the original settlement was founded, so hence the name. Starting to get a really nice sunset. Coming to the end of day one of this border walk. I'm about 2/3 of the way through, I would say, and we're pretty much deep in the Stour Valley now. This is actually an area of outstanding natural beauty, and we're probably going to see some really beautiful vistas tomorrow morning when we start to do the rest of the walk. Just wanted to try and squeeze this spot in before the end of the day. So we're just coming up to Boxted Bridge. I'm on the Suffolk side at the moment, just about to get to the bridge and cross to the Essex side. It's an interesting story behind this bridge because it might not exist for much longer. I'll tell you all about it in a sec. So you've got a better shot of the bridge there. As you can see, it's another cast iron piece, probably late 1800s, early 1900s. Anyway, it's not in the greatest nick apparently, and the council have said that they want to take it down. There's a planning application to actually replace it with something else, a bit sturdier and a bit more modern. Thing is, locals really love this bridge. There's a lot of history associated with it. Okay, it's old, but old structures do need a bit of maintenance. It's not like this is a particularly main road or a busy road. We're really in quite a rural area here. So there's actually posters around saving the bridge. There's actually a link here for signing the petition. So I'll show that to you if you fancy helping out. That's a real shame if they don't manage to save it and do end up bringing it down, replacing it with something else. Feels like a really sort of historic part of the world around here, and modern bridge I don't think will feel quite right. It's starting to get dark now, so I think I'm going to wind it up for day one. Lots of interesting border stuff to look at tomorrow. The river's going to start to widen, and we've also got some really beautiful countryside to look at, including the areas where John Constable painted some of his most famous masterpieces. Maybe we can even pretend we're in the Hay Wain if we can find the right spot. See you in the morning. So it's the next day, the sun's shining again. Got lucky once more with choosing my filming dates. We've come a few miles east of where we were yesterday at the end of the day around Boxford Bridge, and we're just south of a village called Stratford St Mary, very much in the Dead and Vale now, area of outstanding natural beauty, very much in John Constable country. And we're just coming up to the bridge over the river now, and it is devastatingly pretty. So it's a bit of a shame that the A12 is right next to us. That's what all that road noise is. But it's still a really lovely spot. I'm on the Essex side, walking over now to the Suffolk side. There's a small green marker of the border just down the end of the road there. We're properly in Constable country now, just coming up to the village of Dedham. Right on the Suffolk side, just approaching the bridge over the Stour. Dedham is tourist central. It's so pretty, really beautiful place, lots of old buildings, boating on the river. They come to try and see where Constable painted the Dedham Vale painting. It's a lovely spot, and fortunately it's not too busy at the moment. Constable actually went to school here, the old grammar school, which I think they are now private residences, but yeah, I used to walk along the river from East Bulk, Berkholt, where he came from, along to Dedham to go to school. And yeah, just coming up to the bridge now. Let's take a look at the prettiness. Just crossing back over to Essex now. Oh, just spotted a welcome to Essex sign. A bit hidden behind some trees, but it's there. Like a lot of the towns and villages around this part of the world, Dedham's wealth originally came from wool and being a mill town, and there's evidence of that all around this area. And actually I've just found what used to be Dedham Mill, now turned into posh flats obviously, but it's a lovely old building. Right by the river on the Essex side, looking across to Suffolk. What a lovely spot. It's actually February right now, but if this was April or May or one of the summer months, we'd actually see loads of people going up and down the river on boats, people jumping off the bridge, go for a little swim. It's normally extremely busy, lots going on. It's a lovely spot. It's a really lovely walk actually along the river. You can walk all the way to Flatford Mill, which is where we're going in a second, except we're going to go by car. I can't walk all of this border unfortunately, as much as I'd like to. I did a bit of research actually on the Essex coat of arms. So it's not as ancient as I thought it was. Actually someone came up with it in the 16 or 1700s, and I don't know why there's specifically a red background. And in terms of those three blades on there, apparently they're in association with Sussex cutlasses. Sussex, I've done it again. Saxon cutlasses, which apparently were called sexes, S-A-E-X-E-S. I'm not too sure. I don't know whether the sources were dodgy, but anyway, it's to do with the Anglo-Saxons, but maybe not actually as quite an ancient coat of arms as you might have thought. So anyway, on to the next destination, Flatford Mill. So I've come inside the Constable Centre, and here's the Hay Wain. It's not the original, obviously. Apparently that's in the National Gallery. But after this, we're going to go and see if we can find the spot where it's actually painted. So now at Flatford, and it's very touristy. It's actually a national trust site, so it's well looked after. It just means you get lots of visitors. Anyway, that was the river. Now it's still not actually that wide at this point, even though we're actually getting quite close to the sea. But yeah, we're on the Suffolk side here. I was just looking across there, back over to Dedham in Essex. Anyway, we're going to go and try and find the place where the Hay Wain was painted, and yeah, enjoy that spot. So that's the actual mill behind me, but that was the shot. That was the that's what the painting's taken off. And here it's Willie Lott's house. I don't know if anyone still lives in Willie Lott's house, but imagine living in a house that's, you know, in one of the most famous paintings in the world. Quite incredible. It's been nice to come out and find it, even though it's not essential to the border walk, but actually that painting does show both sides of the Stour. So even though people think of it as having taken place in Suffolk, it does technically, but the other side of the river is Essex, so I guess it is kind of relevant. Anyway, that's pretty much it for the Constable country. I'm now going to move along over to Manningtree, and at that point the river finally starts to widen out and become tidal, and starting to make its way out to the North Sea. So join me. So I've moved away from the Dedham Vale, and we've now come out to the White Bridge, which crosses the Stour between Manningtree and Essex over the other side there, and Catawade in Suffolk, which I've just walked from. And the river's getting much bigger now, so at this point it's becoming tidal. There are mud flats, and you can see that it's starting to become a much more serious proposition as it heads down towards the North Sea. Quite a busy road, as you can probably hear, but it's still a pretty nice spot. There's also a railway bridge over that way, secondary crossing, which I'll show you in a sec. This bridge was opened in 2000. There was a previous structure that had been around since the 70s, I think, but they needed to replace it. So they decided to call it the White Bridge, which was basically a reference to previous crossings. So I'm going to read to you. So the river crossing has a recorded history dating back to the 13th century. And it marked the easternmost border of the forests of Essex. And it got its name because the salt water of the tides, as I say, the river is tidal at this point, bleached the timbers of the earlier structures. So when they rebuilt it in 2000, the previous bridge had been called Catawade Bridge, but that was caused some confusion with the smaller bridge that's actually in the village. So they decided to go back to the old name, and bits of it are white. Obviously aren't any timber structures to be bleached by the salt water, but it's a much nicer name obviously. And we've got a nice Suffolk sign as well, featuring that spot we've just been. Manningtree, the town on the river on the Essex side, also made its name from the wool trade, sort of 1500s up to the 1800s. So lots of that kind of textiles manufacturing in this part of the world. These days it's more famous for being, well, calling itself the smallest town in England. I don't think it has that accolade anymore, at least not since the middle of the 2000s, but that was what it was best known for. Looking across to Manningtree there, and the railway bridge across the Stour. Tide looks like it's out at the moment, and that's actually the last crossing over the Stour before you get to the sea at Harwich. No more bridges after this. Another thing that Manningtree probably isn't quite so pleased for being famous for, and that's for the fact that that disgusting misogynist from the 1600s, Matthew Hopkins, the Witchfinder General, based his ridiculous operations out of Manningtree. We're on the way to Harwich, but just wanted to stop off and take in how the river looks now. Over there is Manningtree, and we're heading east out to Harwich and the North Sea. Suffolk over there, I'm on the Essex side. Looking really beautiful and starting to turn into an estuary that will eventually pour out into the North Sea. Pretty lovely. Coming close to the end of this border walk now. Well, it's Shotley Gate. So this is the end of a peninsula that sticks out south of Ipswich, with the Stour on one side and the River Orwell coming down from Ipswich on the other side. So effectively we're right at the very end of the border on the Suffolk side, and as you can see the Stour is massive at this point. It's like a completely different river. So over the other side there is Harwich, which is on the Essex side, the famous port, and that will be the final destination. You'll have seen a second ago the massive container ships that sail out of Felixstowe Harbour. So Harwich and Felixstowe face each other. Harwich seems to be more of a smaller container port and passenger terminal, whereas Felixstowe seems to handle the really heavy stuff. You can see the sides of some of those ships back there. It's actually stood on the little pier here that they're trying to raise money for, to restore it, to be in a better state. You can actually, in the summertime, take a ferry here over to Harwich and round to Felixstowe as well. A little walk-on ferry. Can't take vehicles or anything on there. But it's a shame. It would have been nice to have taken that over to Harwich and get over there that way, but it doesn't work in the winter months. It's still February at the moment. This is a place that's been around as a settlement for a hell of a long time. Apparently the Vikings came into England via this route back in the 800s. It's always been important strategically, and with two routes, up the Stour and up the Orwell, inland, you can see why. So that's the end of the border walk on the Suffolk side. Taking myself back over to the Essex side now to finish up in Harwich, our final destination. See you in a bit. So we come to the final destination on the border walk. We're in Harwich, right at the end of the border by the River Stour, pretty much opposite where we were a minute ago. That Shotley, that shot a minute ago showed pretty much exactly where we were. It's actually recognised as architecturally very significant, Harwich, especially for somewhere so small. Obviously, with it being a port town, there's been all kinds of influences here over the years. You can get the ferry from here actually over to the Hook of Holland, which I'd really like to try one day. But this is a beautiful old building here. I'm not quite sure what one this one is. I think it's possibly a hotel. I know that one over there, the Pier Hotel, is very famous. But yeah, it's actually a much prettier spot than you might think. And here's the Halfpenny Pier. It's because you used to get charged half a penny for admittance once upon a time. There actually used to be a train and ferry service you used to be able to get over to Zeebrugge in Belgium. So you literally get on the train and the train would actually go on to the ferry and then carry on the other side. But I think that got stopped towards the end of the 80s, I think around 87. Though apparently you can still see some of the railway line if you go to the right spot. Harwich is also famous for being the likely launch place for the Mayflower, which was the boat that took the Puritans out to the New World, the United States, 1600s, and the guy who captained that boat, I think, was from here, or they assume he was from here. I'm going to take a bit of a look around the town. Walked out to the end of the Halfpenny Pier, and there are all these padlocks on here, along with some flowers, some golf balls even as well. They look like they're there to remember people maybe aren't with us anymore. It's quite moving actually. Anyway, so one final look out across the border. So that's Felixstowe over there, Carrier Port, and there's the River Orwell, which goes up to Ipswich, and here's the Stour over there, Shotley Gate, where we were a little while ago, by the little pier that we stood by, and over there is the international port where you can pick up the ferry to go out to the Hook of Holland, and further up the river all the places that we've been on this really lovely Essex-Suffolk border walk. So that's the end of this border walk along the Essex-Suffolk border, following River Stour. It's been lovely. That's great weather. As always, we've seen a really lovely variety of landscapes, places, lots of interesting history. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you do like this sort of nerdy geography content, please consider subscribing and give it a little thumbs up. And there should be another one of these hopefully within the next month. I'm not quite sure where it's going to be, but hopefully you can join me for that one too. So from sunny Harwich, it's toodaloo.